Sophia Watson. Thank you for being here and good luck in this lottery.
Lawyers for Good Government. She's mobilized lawyers across the United States for the last 4 years to deal with various immigration crises. She has an impressive background, and obviously you can learn more about her from Tamina's podcast series and in chapter 4 of the book. Welcome, Tracy. Thank you so much for being here. We're just delighted. How did you recognize that a lawyers' movement was absolutely necessary? And what can you tell us about your legal activism over the last 4 years?
Happy to answer that question. And thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor to be part of this group. So how did I recognize the movement was necessary? The answer is I didn't. That's the truth. What I recognized was that lawyers needed a space to talk and to brainstorm and to work together and figure out how we were going to respond to the, at that point, impending Trump administration. And so I was on Facebook, like so many other people, in the hours following the announcement of the election results in 2016. And I was in a lot of different Facebook groups filled with activists who really cared and were concerned and were wondering, what we were going to do next, which is the same question my daughter asked me that prompted me to go on Facebook that evening. What I noticed was amongst all of the conversations, amongst all of the worrying and concern and sort of hand-wringing, every once in a while I would see a post from an attorney. I have to say normally, in most cases, it was a female attorney. I'm not sure the extent to which that's relevant, but proved to be just being pushed down the feed, and lawyers were kind of cross-talking. So all I decided to do was create a space. And at first it was just a post that I said, if you're a lawyer, if you're unhappy with the outcome of the election, if you're concerned about what this might mean for democracy in America, for the future of our nation, let me know and we'll have a conversation. It was only when I saw the response to that post and the sheer number of attorneys that joined the Facebook group that grew out of it, which turned out to be something like 60,000 lawyers in the first 72 hours, followed by another 60,000. We ended up with 125,000 lawyers within about 3 weeks. That's about 10% of the nation's lawyers, more or less. It was only when I saw that and the conversations that ensued that I realized there really was a need for something more than a conversation. And it was from there that Lawyers for Good Government and the Lawyers for Good Government Foundation, which is our 501c3 organization, really took off. And so I have to give credit to the lawyers who joined the group, to the lawyers who took a stand, who reported for duty, really, and in the days and weeks following the announcement of the election results in 2016, and all the lawyers who have participated since then. The movement came from them. What I tried to do was facilitate it. And I'm so lucky that I had a chance to do that. What I've seen, to answer your other question in terms of legal activism over the past 4 years, is just how much lawyers care and how much they are willing to do. Just as one example, 2 days ago, we witnessed something that I don't think any of us ever thought we would see in our lifetimes, although of course it wasn't all that surprising in the end in light of what's been going on the past few years. But within hours of that moment, within hours of the violence in the Capitol, lawyers were already talking. We were already working together. We were already trying to figure out what our next step would be. Within less than 24 hours, more than 8,000 lawyers had signed on to a letter that we put out publicly, identifying the need for an immediate removal, whether through the 25th Amendment or through impeachment and disqualification from future office. And lawyers were willing to take a stand. And I think that's something that has only expanded and grown over the past 4 years as we've seen that the need is there and that when we speak up, we can make a difference. And that's, of course, in addition to all of the other amazing things that lawyers have stepped up and worked on over the past few years, including things like volunteering to work with asylum seekers, thousands, tens of thousands of asylum seekers who've been subjected to inhumane immigration policies over the past few years. And lawyers who've never done that kind of work were willing to step up and learn and do what it takes. So that's a lot in response to a quick question, but there's so much that I've seen. And what I can say is it's truly inspiring to see just how far lawyers are willing to go in order to uphold our oaths of office, our oaths to defend the Constitution, and to really protect the nation that we all care so much for.
Thank you so much. That is a powerful testament, mobilizing 10% of the lawyers in this country. Thank you so much for all the lives and the overall policy impact that has had. It's been the only stopgap that we've seen at the environmental movement and immigration. All the things that we hold dear in this country have been through the judicial system, and lawyers that were willing to take the time. I mean, I'm sure you had sleepless nights and I don't know, lots of coffee and lots of support.
That's for sure. Yeah.
But it's incredible. Thank you so much for being a part of this today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I think we're going to hear from some excerpts from the book from other folks that were part of legal heroes in the Trump era.
But I think it's really important to remind people that people died to secure the vote. And we have that obligation to vote and to make sure that it's not just us voting for our own interests, but that everyone who wants their voice heard has the opportunity and they're not thrown off the voter rolls. And that we have a long way to go in terms of gerrymandering and all of the mess that's been happening, but that we just can't sit back in a democracy and let there be a sham election.
The lawyer sitting at their desk who's drafting documents to help protesters is an activist, in the same way that the person in the street is an activist. It's all part of the structure of fighting to make a better, more just society. And if you're doing that professionally or using your professional skills outside of work, that's all activism. It's about trying to craft that better, more just world for all of us.
It seems like lawyers are really important in the Trump era because rights are being trampled on left and right. And when you talk about activism, the way I think about activism is changing things and getting new things put into place, whereas the legal stuff that needs to happen right now is just enforcing what we even have and protecting the rights that we have as humans and as Americans. And I think that is under attack in this administration in a way that, at least in my lifetime, I don't remember it ever having been.
I think we have one more giveaway next.
Do you want me?
Okay. All right, Serena. Read that.
Hello, my name is Serena, and thank you for being here. And good luck in this worry. And the winner is
Well done, Anika. Thank you.
Thank you. You do have, people are commenting, you have wonderful assistants. They couldn't be cuter. Thank you. So a couple more questions for Tamina. What challenges did you face when writing this book? For those of us who haven't gone through this process, kind of describe the process and also how did you do all of it? I mean, how did you do all of the things? So just walk us through some of the challenges and how you overcame that.
I was thinking about how to describe it all because there's just so much to talk about. And we won't have enough time. So I had to pick and choose what I would talk about. Every book, as I mentioned, has a story of its own. And I wrote 2 books and they had 2 very different journeys. And this one, once the idea popped into my mind that I have to write a book, I immediately knew instinctively the book had to be published before the election for it to make the impact it needed to make, to arouse the inspiration in people who needed it. It needed to come out. So that timeline meant I had to figure out where to get more hours in the day because the day job doesn't stop, and COVID obviously had new challenges. So I had the editorial team help me, but I woke up at 4:30 a.m. and I worked until 6:30 in the morning on the book every morning, 6, 7, because, you know, the day job began. But the two things I wanted to actually talk about were really the book name and the book cover, because the writing, of course, is, you know, I had the help for it and I was doing my drafts and the editorial team was just on, you know, we were back and forth. But I struggled with the name very much. And when you call attention to something with the name Trump in it, you're inviting attention. And I didn't know if I wanted to have in the Trump era, because all of these legal heroes are legal heroes regardless. But I needed to define that era, otherwise it wouldn't make sense. But as you might remember, we were going through a national crisis with the Black Lives Matter protests, and we saw in Portland the unmarked cars and the unmarked officers. And going back in history just a little bit to give you context, in November 2016, after the election, Breitbart took one of my blog posts and actually repurposed it and quoted me, and it gave me anxiety a little, I have to say. On the one hand, I felt, gosh, I've arrived, you know, Breitbart is writing about me, but on the other hand, I was like, oh my gosh, they know me. And my husband at the time, who's incredibly supportive, and without him, I wouldn't be able to do anything, Tom Watson, he said, well, do what you need to do, but make sure there's no black cars in front of our houses, in front of our house. Now, that was November 2016, and it felt like a joke, and it was jokey, but it never really felt like it would be a true thing until I was writing the book and until Portland was happening. So that's when I almost didn't finish the book. I really thought, do I even write this book? Why even do it? You know, I've got it, okay, I don't need to call attention to myself. But I knew this message was incredibly important. And that's when I talked to several people. The book group helped me. And Christine, you called me at 6 a.m. many times to give me courage. But that name, surprisingly, was one of the most difficult things about the book. And the second thing, and in the end, I decided if I'm going to send a message and I'm the only one I think I can send it, who is determined to send it, you've got to own your message. You've got to own what you're doing. And if I didn't have that title in the way that I had, the book wouldn't actually have the impact. We needed to narrow down these 4 years, not just for the immediate time, but also for the future. Because this is a historic time. And the second thing was the cover, believe it or not. You know, I went through the cover and I had a lot of different options. And I settled, I really loved the cover that we have now, but I wasn't quite sure if it was going to scare people or if it wasn't going to give the inspiration it needed, or if it was just going to be, you know, was it going to depict doom and gloom? I wasn't sure. And so when I picked the other cover and I finalized it, you know, I paid for it, I had a contract signed, you know, in an oblivious moment, I did a Facebook post saying, you know, this is the cover that didn't make it. And the emotional outpour of every single person really told me that that's the book cover that needed to be it. And I cannot tell you how much sleep I lost on just the cover itself. So while the content I was very happy with, I knew what I was doing, I needed to make sure the book, you know, if it was on a bookshelf somewhere, would actually capture the attention of the person sort of walking by after buying a cookbook maybe, and say, yes, you know, I really care about what's happening. And in hindsight, I'm so grateful. And I have to tell you, Tracy called me out of the blue. Christine called me out of the blue. Several people called me saying, look, your cover needs to be even stronger than that because you're telling important stories. And so I lost a lot of sleep, but I'm so glad that I got to the end of it. And many, many times in this very short, but what seemed like an eternity journey, I almost didn't finish the book for a number of reasons. And so when I say Laura Peterson felt like that trainer saying, you can, you know, that weight, you can do it, I cannot tell you the value that had on me to keep me going.
How, I think some of the questions, you know, for those of us who have kids at home that are, you know, been homeschooled, working from home, you have a law firm. The question is, do you have more hours in the day than the rest of us?
It's something I struggle with all the time. But what I do tell people is you've got to have, I call it village. I have an incredible village. I have several villages. I have so many villages, actually. Because, you know, it's a bit like that Hugh Grant movie, We're Not an Island. And so when it comes to my day job, I am incredibly grateful for the incredible team I have. The associate lawyer Luca, I have amazing paralegals, and you know what's interesting about my law firm is that every single person is compassionate and believes in what we do. And you know, after the insurrection, I have to say, I wish I recorded the conversations that happened in our office over the last 6 years. In between work, we always had these passionate conversations, and a lot of the things that are happening were predicted in my office. And you know, we'd cry when the Abortion Act is being, you know, bill is being signed in Arizona, and hugging each other. So I have an incredible team that really understands the impact we are making as a group. So they give me the space, and you know, and they make it happen for me. If I need 2 hours, they'll make it happen for me. I have an incredible team. The immigration lawyers in Washington State and around the country, I cannot thank them enough for everything they've done. You know, you do need somebody to say where to go, but the moment I'd say, hey, we need 5 people for this, we have them. I cannot express how much gratitude I have for them. That's my village. When it comes to anything, there's a village out there. So I need help, and I have that help. And the biggest help is my husband and my children. You know, they have learned to feed themselves, bathe themselves. If they don't have clothes, well, there we go. They're not clean. But, you know, my kitchen is probably the one that's most neglected out of all of this.
I have 2 young daughters myself, and I just want to acknowledge how powerful it is for them to have you as their mother. They may have to forage to find things to eat. No, I'm kidding, but you know, that's the sacrifice. And I know that you've had conversations with them, and they say, "Mommy, this is important. We want you to do this work." And it's the next generation understanding that we are, you know, we all have to be civically engaged in whatever ways. And that you were just such an incredible example of that for them. So we have a little time, actually. So I wanted to say, you know, yes, the last 4 years were difficult. What are some of the top 3 things that describe your work, or what are you most proud of? Yes, there's the book, but just give me a little background and how the last 4 years of your life were the highlights of doing this work.
Good question. I have to think on the spot for that one. I think the proudest thing, I think what I think I'm proudest of is actually recognizing I needed to be in position, because November 2016 hit, and I think we all were scared, we were all anxious, but that paralyzed so many of us. And after being paralyzed for a week, I realized I needed to channel that anxiety immediately. I don't do well with not doing anything. And using that passion and that recognition, I went to the Immigration Lawyers Association, and at the time, the executive committee really just said, what do you need? I'll give it to you. And they gave me the response committee. And that Christmas, I went to the Christmas dinner and I said, you know, I don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen, but we need to be in position. And as we were in position, 30 people signed up, reluctantly, some of them, but we had signatures of 30 people. Every one of them, you know, was on standby. But what I'm recognizing that we needed to be in place and actually having some platform is what I think was the important thing that propelled everything else. There are many, many, many other highlights, but if we were not in position, we could not have mobilized and organized in the same manner. And what was also important is leading up to that, I had a live radio show. Of course, I'm entrenched in our community because of the work I do in my day job, but in my volunteer work, but I also write a lot, so people knew me. And so what I also recognized is every politician, every lawmaker, every policymaker, they are going to be dealing with immigration in ways they have never done before. How are we going to get them? How are we going to get the help for them? So while we had our response committee set up, I was simultaneously telling everybody, hey, you're going to need us, we're here. You're going to need us, we're here. And so it was a moment of envisioning who's going to need us, who needs to know about us, and being in position. And boy, when we had that rally, I spoke at the rally where it was only heads. I don't remember how many heads. There were maybe 10,000 people at Westlake. That was my first rally speech, but being in position was the most important part, in my opinion. Everything else propelled from that.
Thank you. I think that's really important to acknowledge, is that it was paralyzing, and there were folks that, came together. In listening to your podcast and listening to some of the lawyers that were featured in your book, I mean, that I think separated everyone out, is to say, okay, I need to get involved. And one of the lawyers in the book is a environmental lawyer, and he said, the earth needed a good lawyer. And he was very clear that they got into position immediately throughout the game plan after the election and mobilized. And that is one of the reasons why on so many fronts, again, we were able to protect the rule of law and protect the human beings and the animals and the environment that it's impacted by. So it's really, really powerful. Thank you. We'll come back to Mina with other questions. But I have the pleasure now of introducing Jill Scott, who is the director of legal at Zymework, a biotech company. She was one of the first volunteers for Wyden. You can listen to her interview on the podcast and read about her in chapter 6 of the book. And I wanted to kind of point out that she is not an immigration lawyer by trade. And so her story is really unique, because she certainly jumped in feet first and made a huge impact and went to the border. And let's talk a little bit more about that. Thank you for joining us today. One question I have for you is, how did your lawyer background compel you to take action, and what advice do you have for lawyers wondering whether or not they should be a part of this grand solution?
Thanks for having me, Tamina and Christine. It's really a pleasure to be here today, and I'm honored to be part of your book, Tamina. So how did my lawyer background compel me to take action? So as you mentioned, I'm not an immigration lawyer. I had a taste of immigration work in law school. I worked at the Refugee and Immigrant Advocacy Clinic at Northwest Justice Project here in Seattle during my 3L year, and spent the majority of that time on a single case, which was an Afghan teenager who had been trafficked to the United States. And part of the work we did with her was getting her into foster care, getting her into school, and really embedding her as a member of our community. And as part of that, she really found fundamental justice in a loving family, in being able to be a full-fledged American, just have an ordinary American life. And so I went on and built a career as a biotechnology lawyer. And as you mentioned, I currently work at Zymeworks, which is a biotech company. And I support worldwide clinical trials for cancer therapeutics. And I love being in-house, and I love being a biotech lawyer, but somewhere along the way, I realized that I really missed the connection to refugee work. And so once family separation started under Trump's zero tolerance policy, I knew I really couldn't stand by any longer. And as attorneys, I believe that part of our role is to really bear witness to our clients' experience and make sure we stand with them and that they're not alone through the process. And we're really in a unique position to be able to do that, to really acknowledge their humanity, record their experiences, and advocate for their survival. So what's great about Widen is that Tamina and the other co-founders have really created a model where somebody like me, who's not an immigration attorney, doesn't have that background, can really jump in and use their legal skills to make an actual difference. There's the infrastructure there to be able to do that. So I've done a few pro bono asylum cases with Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. And those were affirmative cases where the client is not in immigration detention. What Tamina created with Widen is the ability for someone like me to jump in on a defensive asylum case, which means that the client is in immigration detention. They're in essentially federal prison. And so that experience was a real eye opener for me. And it really, as one immigration judge has said, it's a death penalty case in a traffic court setting. It's a completely different system, one that lacks a lot of the protections of due process that many of us are used to. So the experience with Widen really encouraged me to think about what else I could do. And in late October 2019, my mom and I, who's a retired Superior Court judge, and I have to say my mom is my own Tamina Watson. She was a lawyer who was an incredible advocate in her community and in the state of Alaska. And so I would just she's on the call today, and I just want to acknowledge the role that she's played in my own story of activism. But my mom and I went to McAllen in Brownsville, Texas, and we crossed the border into Matamoros, which is where actually Tracy's organization, Lawyers for Good Government, has a project in Matamoros. This is a refugee camp. At the time we went, there were about 2,000 people there. No NGO presence at that time. We crossed by foot from Brownsville into Matamoros over the bridge. And we really did a bunch of different things when we were there. There was, again, no organized medical care. And so there was a pediatrician with us. We helped her. We helped distribute food, water, supplies, and we helped with preparing asylum applications as well while we were there. And one of the things that really struck me about the experience, there are many things that struck me about the experience, but one that I'll share with you today is that there was this heavy irony of the fact that these migrants really want to follow the rule of law. They present themselves lawfully at a border. They're not violating any laws by doing so. They want to follow the rule of law. They know better than many Americans the value of a country based on the rule of law. So for me, my legal background was a bit of a reckoning that I couldn't abide by my stated values towards social justice without actually living those values through the practice of law.
No, thank you. What, if for a lot of folks that are wondering how to kind of jump in, what's the first step? Say you're a lawyer, maybe you're an immigration lawyer, maybe you're not. Kind of walk us through how they get activated.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of the hardest parts. First, I just want to acknowledge that I think after this week, we can all appreciate that things aren't going to go away when Joe Biden is sworn in a little over a week. White supremacy runs deep and wide in this country. I was complacent during the Obama years. I was clueless in many ways during the Obama years, and that, for me, that won't happen again. So 3 things that I think any lawyer can do. You can do all 3 of these things today if you want. The first one is learn and read about organizations doing work that you care about. As one of the sound bites mentioned earlier, find what lights your fire. What are you passionate about? Because that's what you're going to stay committed to, whether it's immigration, whether it's LGBT issues, Black Lives Matter, voter suppression, gun rights, healthcare access. Find what you care about, read about it, learn about it, figure out who's doing good work in that area. The second thing is to reach out to those organizations and figure out what they're currently doing. There is almost absolutely something you can do. You can always donate money, but beyond that, there's usually a role for lawyers to play in helping those organizations. The third thing is really talking to your people. We all have, as Tamina mentioned, we all have villages, we all have spheres of influence and social circles of of influence. And so talk to your people, figure out, learn from them, grow from them, figure out what they're doing, and really normalize activism as a way of life. For me, I obviously have my day job as well, but I've also figured out that integrating activism into my daily life is something that I want to do and want to continue to do. And for those that, feel like that it's difficult to find the energy and the time to do so, I totally understand that. I think that for me, what's happened is initiating this work and taking the first step towards it has really uncovered sort of a conduit of energy below the surface of my sort of day-to-day existence as a parent and as a wife and as an employee that allows me to keep going and allows me to sort of slough off the excuses that I really put forth previously for why I wasn't doing this. And I can turn a lot of that passive empathy that I had towards small but very tangible actions towards activism.
No, thank you. And I think it is. It's a struggle to find all the minutes and hours in the day, but the work that you've accomplished and the amount of human beings that have been so sort of inalterably assisted by the work. One of the things I listened to the podcast is the facts of how many immigrants are not represented in immigration court.
Right. It's astounding. Yeah, there's no right to counsel as there is in Article 3 courts. There's just so many differences in the process that I didn't appreciate. And I think that again, that Wyden really opens the door for lawyers like me to be able to see this completely different area of law and participate in it in a very real way. And yet have the stability of an immigration lawyer. You're partnered with an immigration lawyer to do this work. And so you have the comfort of knowing there is an immigration lawyer who's guiding you, but you can do a lot of the work to support them.
No, thank you so much. It's again, the book, you're featured in the book, and also I couldn't sort of underscore how compelling the podcast stories are and listening to the podcast. And so thank you so much for being with us here
Thanks for
today,
having me.
Jill. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So we are on to having some more wonderful quotes and excerpts from the book from those that are featured. We've got one more set of those and then another giveaway.
Find an organization that is focused on an issue that you care about and show up and be willing to do whatever.
I think one of the silver linings behind this horrific era that we've gone through under the Trump administration is a coming together of different communities working together to fight for civil rights and to fight for justice.
Especially in these times, I really want to encourage people to read and think about the history of our country, the history of racism and in our country and nativism in our country, and understand, because when people want to do immigration work or do the criminal legal work, I think it's helpful or even work with protesters to understand the context in which people find themselves in need and why that is, and try to have a deeper understanding of that. So I think reading books like How to Be Anti-Racist, right, by Dr. Kendi, or So You Want to Talk About Race, because it's wonderful to help and we want the help. You can be even more helpful when you have some context and appreciation and understanding for what people are going through. And you can't ever completely know, right? Because you can't be in that person's shoes, but you can try to understand.
Okay, time for another giveaway. All right, Serena, go ahead.
Thank you again for being here, and good luck in this hurry. And the winner There's
Yay! Congratulations. Thank you. So we are delighted to have another one of our heroes here today. Neha Dewan is a lawyer at Wilson, Elser, Moskowitz, Edelman and Dicker LLP and National Director of South Asians for Biden. Neha served as the Deputy Director and General Counsel at the New York City Mayor de Blasio's office. And she's been long active in both local and national politics. Most recently, Neha co-founded South Asians for America, a national grassroots organization dedicated to helping elect South Asian candidates and advocating and lobbying on behalf of the South Asian community at the local and state levels. In 2016, Neha served as the national co-chair for South Asians for Hillary and was appointed by Hillary Clinton to her campaign's National AAPI Leadership Council. Thank you so much for joining us here today. Our question for you is, we know that your legal activism made an incredible difference in the 2020 election. Can you tell us about what you observed about mobilizing the South Asian, both the legal community and the community in general, and how much that has changed in the last 6 months to a year, right?
There we go. Thank you so much for that question, Christine, and thank you, Tamina, for having me here today. I'm really so inspired by you. I'm very grateful that our journey actually started with South Asians for Biden, and thank you all for being here. I guess this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. So as Christine mentioned, I'm the National Director for South Asians for Biden, and I've really been very active in the South Asian community for some time now. And, I've been through 3 presidential cycles, and it really has changed over time. And one of the things that I've noticed is the level of activism and advocacy that has actually changed in the South Asian community. So for instance, our parents' generation, who tend to be the first line of immigrants into the country, back in the 60s or 70s, are finding a voice that they didn't necessarily have before, because they felt, we just need to lay down, do our work, and, continue with what we're doing. But now they sort of feel empowered, by the second level of generation who has gone to law school, is very active in the legal community. I mean, you'll be hard pressed to find a lot of lawyers from that generation, but it's growing more and more, and certainly in our generation, and that's played a role. For those highlighting the fact that you have a voice, you can say something, and it's okay. If something is bothering you, this is your government too. And certainly this election, what we found is, the Trump administration's policies have impacted our community so disproportionately, starting with the Muslim ban to something as recent as COVID and how it's affected small businesses, and even the frontline, the healthcare workers on the front line. And, this is where it's sort of a cross section of, activism and also the legal community, right? So with South Asians for Biden, it was a goal, obviously, to get, President-elect Biden elected to office. But it was done, the idea was to do it in a very surgical way that was not done in the past. So typically also, within these communities, I don't want to say there's politics, but there tends to be one community that, stands out more just because of population, by number. So for instance, in the South Asian community, it tends to be the Indian population by sheer numbers in the United States. And what I felt was very important was to give a voice to the other communities also within the South Asian community. And I think that's where the legal background also comes in, the logical training, where it's, there's a voice for everybody. So it was very, very important for us to make sure that the Nepali, Bhutani, Sri Lankan, Bangladeshi, Pakistani community, Afghani community was also part of the conversation, because that was the only way that we were going to accomplish our goal. So what and I'm so proud that what we actually ended up accomplishing was an intergenerational approach. So we had folks from the retirees to folks who had just entered college, and it was a collective effort. And it was, and then what we did was we also created national councils. So for folks who didn't necessarily say, I'm part of the South Asian process and I'm more of a Pakistani or a Bangladeshi, what we did was we created this council so we could still reach everybody, but it was through a common channel of the South Asians for Biden digital strategy and messaging. And again, that messaging was very tailored to the community at hand, but in a way that was meeting directly. So for instance, I'll give you one huge challenge that we had with this community, particularly Indian American community, was, there was a few things that were happening in India or some laws that were actually passed in India that targeted Muslims. That was very controversial, and President-elect Biden had made some statements about human rights violations, which really, really angered the Indian American community. And there was so many false assertions that were actually floating around on WhatsApp groups, which, funny enough, the Indian American community that has traditionally been Democrat was now thinking that, you know what, Trump is an ally of India. He and Prime Minister Modi are very close. So as a result, and President-elect Biden made these statements, therefore we're going to vote for Trump as a result. Not necessarily realizing that foreign policy is just one issue. And really, if you think about it, everything else is going to affect your community. And it is at the end of the day, right? I mean, who do you see that's really South Asian that's in the administration? Is that really reflective of our community? The Pakistani and the Bangladeshi community had a completely different reaction to that, right? Because they've been affected by what India has done, and certainly in the United States with the Muslim ban and things like that. So what we did was very carefully tailor our messages, always in a very positive way. It was never coming from a place of negative targeting, but in a positive way, really explain to the community why it was important to vote for Biden-Harris ticket. How is important for your children going forward? And that's where I really feel that working hand in hand with the legal community, we were able to find the correct messaging to be able to present that to the community, that it's not just one aspect, but it's one aspect of a buffet of issues that really affect us. And the big part of it is it's in your own community. Then, the Bangladeshi community had its own issues, Pakistani and so on and so forth. But we wouldn't have been able to hear that unless we had channels within our diaspora to hear what those issues are. I may not necessarily have had a connection to, what the very specific issues were in the Pakistani community. But it was very important to get through to everybody, right? And this is what we were actually able to accomplish. So we had the messaging, with the help of everybody, the advocates, what we were hearing on the ground, and then the legal community, very targeted, that then sort of percolated to everybody, but also motivated folks who were not engaged before. Who actually came on board this time, and it was interesting because it's the first time that everything is virtual, right? So how do you engage people? How do you engage people who don't necessarily speak the English language but want to be a part of the process? And so we had all of those options. Said, okay, we'll give you postcards that you can write in your own language, in which you can actually connect to people, or be on phone banks where somebody can actually hear your name and your accent, and you're speaking in that language and making that connection. And we were really able to do that with the different communities. And it wasn't just with the Biden-Harris ticket. It then continued. We thought we were going to be done November 3rd. I mean, we started this December 2019, and we're like, oh boy, we got 2 more months of this to go, and then turn focus to Georgia. And what I really found is the power of a community that is different in culture, dialect, languages, religion, that comes together. And that's really the power of, being the margin of victory in some cases. I mean, if you look at these votes and how close they were, I mean, even the Bangladeshi community, it was the largest community in Michigan, and you're looking at the numbers. It's astounding, right? We won. I mean, you're looking at a few thousand in the Georgia races, and you look at the Asian American community, South Asian community in Georgia, that makes a difference. So what I'm very proud of with our community is we've been able to reach out to people who didn't necessarily have a voice before, who now feel empowered, and we were able to do it in a way that was culturally sensitive, but also being proud American patriots, to make sure that we were, at the very basic level, turning over to human decency, civility, and restoring honor to the White House. So was thrilled to, really be a part of the process, but I love the fact that we really came together, while celebrating our differences.
No, that's incredible. I mean, it's made all the difference. I mean, I look at Georgia, and it is people of color that have put us in a shifted Senate in a Democratic majority. And it's a powerful testament to all of the organizers all over the country. And I know Tamina was very engaged. She had lots of Zoom calls with you and with others. And it's, again, that activism is so important right now for representation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We really appreciate having you here today. So many great inspirational ways to get engaged and know that it is possible to do these really incredible changes, make these changes in our world. So we have another hero that's actually not featured in the book, but Tamina wanted to have her join us today. Her name is Elaine Banton. She's a barrister in the United Kingdom, which means trial attorney to us here in the US. She's not in the book, but she's an example of a legal hero outside the United States. Elaine specializes in employment, equality, discrimination law, and human rights. She's recognized in both Legal 500 and Chambers and Partners, regularly instructed in high value and complex trials by private companies, public sector bodies, and individuals. She's the co-author of the chapter on human rights and employment law for Tolley's Employment Law. She's also named a pro bono hero in 2009 by the Attorney General's Office. She's very active in her community and serves on numerous boards in the UK, as well as she serves as the co-chair of the Bar Council's Equality, Diversity, and Social Mobility Committee and on the Bar Council's GMC, co-chair of Middle Temple's Race Equality, Inclusion, and Anti-Racism Working Group. And she was a finalist for the first 100 Years Inspirational Women of the Year Award and Barrister of the Year in 2019. You can read more about her. We'll put a link in the chat. Gosh, thank you so much for joining us all the way from the UK. First of all, we'd love to know how you met Tamina, and tell us about your legal activism in the UK and what the ongoing challenges are and what's happening there in contrast to perhaps what's happening in the United States. So thank you. Oh, I think you're on mute. There we are.
Good. Thank you
You're
so
welcome.
much for that wonderful, warm introduction. And I have to say, it's a real honor and an inspiring privilege to be part of such a wonderful event and to hear the accounts. I've read the book. It's tremendous. I'm recommending it to everyone here in the UK. But I do think the events of last year have brought us close together, because through things like this, through mediums like this, it doesn't matter that we're abroad or we're divided, separate by seas, because we can actually meet and communicate like this and be involved. So really, just to let you know a few things about myself and what's happening in the UK. Firstly, I met Tamina when she was in the UK. She qualified as a barrister in the UK, and I met her when she was looking for the last part of her qualification to become a barrister in the UK, and I recommended that she apply to where I was practicing at that time as a barrister. And as you say, the rest is history. And I have been so inspired and impressed and pleased and proud to see the amazing work that Tamina has done in what I can see have been immensely challenging times in the US. They've been difficult over here as well, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. But just so you know, I am particularly invested in the USA as well, because my family, there's a sort of a tale of endeavor and immigration in my family. My paternal grandfather came from the south of India and went to Jamaica. And so that's sort of my heritage, which is not entirely dissimilar from Kamala Harris being South Asian and being Jamaican and also being a female attorney. And one of my jokes is that you've never seen us together in the same room at the same time. And then my mother, she came from Jamaica to the UK, but her 7 siblings went to the United States. So I have all of my mom's family in America from coast to coast. So I've very much grown up watching America and being very keen to learn of what's going on there and to know that there are so many amazing activist lawyers who have stood up and had the courage to fight against a very difficult regime has been inspiring. And one of the silver linings is that the Trump era has actually galvanized so many talented lawyers to the work that we're seeing recorded in Tamina's wonderful, wonderful book. So that's how I met Tamina. But what's happening in the UK, particularly since Boris Johnson's election in 2019, we have seen what I would say unprecedented attack against lawyers that in my career of over 20 years, I have never seen before. Perhaps we've been lucky because we haven't been singled out in that way. But I'd say since certainly this year, it has really stepped up. And what have we been dealing with? We've been negotiating Brexit. We've had COVID. We've had Black Lives Matter. We've had a lot of challenges, and COVID in particular exposed and laid bare a lot of inequalities. And so when Black Lives Matter came along, it really galvanized a lot of people, a lot of lawyers in the areas of law that I practice in, particularly equality and diversity, a lot of immigration lawyers, really, really stepped up to do a lot of community and activism work. And what we found was that lawyers were being singled out expressly in the press, in social media, by senior government ministers, really saying extremely negative comments about, in particular, immigration lawyers, that they were lefty do-gooders, that this was activism and it was all political, and they were trying to frustrate the government's attempt at various policies. And so where there were mass deportations, for example, being done, and lawyers would challenge that and would succeed, they were then being vilified. And then what happened was you'd find that individuals were being attacked. Lawyers in their firms carrying out their work were actually being attacked. And to see that happen in the UK with one of the oldest legal systems, which has been emulated across the world, it was a very sad day. So I have to say, we do have a lot of solidarity with events happening in the USA, with the Trump regime, with what we've seen with the Boris Johnson era. There have been a lot of things which are unfortunately similar. We've seen the rise of cronyism with government contracts actually being given out, very lucrative contracts without any form of transparency. And so when lawyers have stood up and challenged that process because it's unjust and it's against what we understand fairness and equality to be, the response has been that the whole process of judicial review is now under reflect and actually under review itself. So the way that we can challenge decisions via public law is now under examination in the UK. So I think that is quite a different thing that for us to deal with as lawyers in the UK. But certainly from my point of view, it just makes it even more important for us to have the courage and the strength to stand up for what we believe in. And that is about equality, justice, and the rule of law. And I think that we are doing that, and that's vitally, vitally important. And certainly for me, one of the things that makes me do the work that I do and keeps me working through the night at times when I have to, is the potential to make meaningful change. And I really do feel that this is the time that we are doing that. And it's a great opportunity. And again, it's one of the silver linings. So I'm just very grateful to be here and take part in such a phenomenal event and to hear all the speakers. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Barrister, for being with us today. And Tamina and I briefly spoke about you, and you have been such an incredible mentor for her. And we all know, as women, it's incredible for someone to say to empower someone else to do this work. So know that you played a vital role in all of the work that Tamina is doing, and so appreciate what you're doing in the UK. It is all hands on deck, and it is a scary time, but it is also a time for us to find our path and our journey and how we become part of the solution, right?
That's so true. And I just want to say about mentorship, I'm such an advocate for mentorship. I think one of the most important things we can do, and it, you know, in terms of empowering ourselves, is actually to lift up others and empower others. And this is why I'm just so blown away to see Tamina's star shine as brightly and as vibrantly as it does. Wonderful.
Thank you. Thank you. What's incredible to have so many wonderful guests join us today for this book launch. I know that Tamina is probably a little overwhelmed by all of it, but we are going to switch over and see if folks have any questions. And while you're thinking about that, we wanted to just have all of our legal heroes in the Trump era heroes give a wave. I don't know what screen you have on for your Zoom, but if you're one of our heroes that we didn't specifically talk to, Tamina's waving. She's very, very happy to have all of you here with us today. And so are there any questions from the audience? I neglected, it's funny, Tamina has such an incredible biography. I realized I left off some important parts, and I wanted to just say that, of course, she founded the nonprofit, the Washington Immigration Defense Network, WIDEN, which funds and facilitates legal representation in the immigration courtroom. And she was also the co-founder of Airport Lawyers, which I'd love to talk a little bit more about, because I think that was really an incredible joining of lawyers from around the country to help people, which obviously provided critical services during the early travel bans. As you may have found out, if you didn't know, Tamina was born and raised in the UK before relocating to Seattle. And I would be remiss to say that of course, she wants to acknowledge her husband, Tom, and her wonderful children who we were able to see today. And her Bangladeshi heritage has enriched all of the work that she does. And so I just wanted to really highlight that. And you can see that community being very present here today. So are there any questions that folks have for Tamina about the book, about anything, the process, how to get engaged, how to get involved? Let us know. And Tamina, do you have anything you'd like to share based on everything you've heard today as well?
Well, thank you so much for all the speakers who agreed to actually be part of this, to make this a spectacular event. And it's more than what I could have hoped for, because I really wanted to demonstrate how lawyers really have stepped up over the last 4 days. And I think if we hadn't, maybe, this week may not have gone the way it has. It's truly, truly inspirational. I wanted to highlight a few things. Please do get the book and read it. I really want you to read the book. It's got a lot more details than we can share in such a short amount of time. And I want you to know that 3 organizations are actually getting donations from portions of the proceeds of this book. Lawyers for Good Government, Tracy Love, who I've seen from the get-go, her office is doing so much work, and even as she mentioned about the petition for the 25th Amendment, they have been non-stop. So in recognition of their hard work, portions are going to them. Their website, if Tracy's still here or if somebody could post the link, is lawyersforgoodgovernment.org. Donations are also going to forward.us. It's a nonprofit advocacy organization that has been incredibly supportive to the nonprofit that we started together, Takao, Erin, Jay, and Minda, who you will read about in the book. So 3 organizations are being highlighted through the book, and it's just very important to me that everybody understands that we have to do this together, and nonprofits obviously need more help. I would love for you to put a review on wherever you get your book from, because you have all come here from listening to either me or some of the heroes in the book, but this message needs to go out to people who don't know me or you or your friends. So the review makes the book actually pop up, and it's important that that continues to get out. Listen to the podcasts. There's nothing better than listening to the heroes in their own voices. I put out a link earlier, but if you go to Tamina Talks Immigration on iTunes, you'll find that. And then I wanted to really add that you had asked me a question. Before I say that, I wanted to mention something about Elaine. You know, Elaine and I met, I was still looking for my apprenticeship, pupillage. Pupillage doesn't mean anything here, Elaine. I was actually, when I had to reflect back on writing the biography for the book, I had to start from scratch, because the biographies that were on my website and everywhere else, and big shout out to Mim and Caroline if they're here, because they really sort of prompted me questions and made me think about from the time I was little to law school and so forth. I did so much pro bono work in the UK. I've forgotten about it all. And in fact, I did so much pro bono work that I would get other students to come to the events I would organize so that they could do pro bono work. And it was one of those events at which I had met Elaine. And so it's only when I was writing my biography 15 years later that I remembered and looked back on my life before the United States. But it's all, you know, pieced together and these little links that make this long chain. And then the highlight that you asked me earlier, two things that really did come. I think everybody will agree that when you're in the trenches of a problem, that's when you can actually see what solutions can be created. And Wyden came from that. But also my story in the book sort of ended with the story of the legal clinics that hadn't quite finished. And I don't know if Lalita Uppala is here from the Indian Association of Washington, Western Washington. She and I basically started something very new. It's a new type of legal clinic that was actually adopted, and there was some creative model that was created by the city of Seattle, and all of the people that were part of that effort are in the book. But by that process, we've been able to create a brand new system in which you can have access to justice at scale. So what do we do from here? I think the message I want people to take is every single one of us has a voice. Every single one of us can do something. And you don't have to be a lawyer. You can be a teacher. It doesn't matter what you do as a profession. Or if you're a stay-at-home mom, we all have skills. If you're a stay-at-home mom, honestly, you are more skillful than many of us, because you are juggling so much at the same time in a different way. Use your skills, find something, whether it's the PTA. Every single aspect of our country has to be rebuilt, and all of us have to be part of that. And what we have to remember is the last 4 years, we kept things in place, we've learned lessons, we've collaborated. And one of the things that you must listen to is Matt Adams from the Northwest Immigrants' Rights Project. Listen to his podcast interview. And what he says very clearly is the Trump era has been unifying in ways in which we have never realized before. All sorts of communities have come together. And what I say is, and I say this in every aspect of my life, the glass is always half full. We've had a very difficult 4 years. We're coming out of it. But what you look at that are the positives. We've come together, we've learned lessons, we have found solutions, everybody's found something. And our time is coming to implement them. So your work does not stop. Your work, in fact, continues in more fervor. And make those changes actually implemented. Call your congressmen, your senators, see what you can do at a grassroots level, because the grassroots is where it's all happening. I can talk on and on and on if I have an audience, so I'm going to shut up for a minute. I'll make sure that there's space for questions for me or any of the legal heroes. There are several of them here. Anila Afzali, Fiona McIntee, Shelley Garzone, Joan Tierney. Who else is here? Can you shout out? Wave your hand. Do you want to acknowledge Nicole Lockett? She is my wind beneath my wings. Taught me everything I know in many ways. And so read the book about her. Who have I missed?
Samina, there's some questions in the chat.
Oh, sorry, I'm reading. I'm just talking.
Yeah, there you go. You know, you're wonderful. Your good friend Fiona would like to know when you are going to run for office.
Oh, I don't know.
There were a few seconds to that in the chat. We'll make sure you see that. Maybe not now. But some of the other questions were, how can they get an autographed version of the book? And what is your next book, or when is your next book, right? Everyone's pandering for more. So
thank you. I'm so honored. Those who won the raffle will get signed copies, and I wish we could have been in person so I could have had the honor of signing right in front of you. But if you want a signed book, please email me. I will. It would be an honor and pleasure. Next books, you know, I have to say, when I wrote my first book, at that time I woke up. I wrote the book between midnight and 5 a.m. This time it's a different journey. It was 4:30 a.m. to 6 something. I'm already thinking about updating this book, but I'm actually currently narrating Legal Heroes. That's a challenge in and of itself, and lots of technical issues, you know, work from home, studio from home, and even how to read a book. And so Caroline, my book coach and my editor, she is a fairy godmother in that role. I'm also actually updating my first book. My editor Lornette said, why do you give yourself outrageous deadlines? My deadline for releasing the updated book of the first book is really by end of January. So we'll see if I can do that. But I actually have a third book in mind. I don't know if I'll have enough time in the day, but I have so much to say. But if I didn't have great editors, I probably wouldn't say it well. And so I'm going to write a lot more, I think, but I love my practice. I love my team. I love my clients. I love what I do. I truly am blessed to be able to find the passion. And if people didn't know, I actually didn't want to practice immigration law. I really didn't. I honestly didn't. Every time it came my way, I pushed it away. Because my father was an immigration attorney in London, a barrister. And in my mind, immigration was going to be asylum day in, day out. And you all know how challenging that can be on the heart. But my mother kept pushing me, and I became a lawyer, of course. But when I came here, I just didn't want to practice immigration law. And having been a trial attorney in the UK, I thought maybe litigation would be it. But when you have a calling, the universe will just send that calling to you until you succumb. And I succumbed to it. And the first day I thought, why was I fighting this? Everything I've done, my entire background has made me the right person to do what I'm doing. And I'm just following my instinct in the journey that the universe has kept for me.
Thank you so much, Tamina. Wow, right? How inspiring. We're so grateful to you and your service. And we all know there's some bigger, grander, hopefully policy opportunities for you to integrate all of the experience and the work that you've done at the federal level, because as was mentioned by Fiona, there's still so much work to be done. Does anyone have anyone's interested in speaking or any final thoughts? You're welcome to unmute, and we're going to save the chat because there's great comments in there. We'll make sure that Tamina gets to see them all. And yeah, we would just appreciate so much all of you being here today. I think we're all in need of great inspiration, and we have found it today in this book and moving forward, understanding that the last 4 years have really galvanized and brought the changes necessary to protect the rule of law and the humans and the humans environment impacted by it. But we know that, boy, there's a lot of healing that needs to happen in the next 4 years, and continued activism and continuing to use our voice in whatever way is compelling and impactful. And that can be on a board or committee at the very local level, organizing a group of moms. It can be, showing up at your state legislature to make sure that their policies are inclusive and that they understand that we are paying attention, that we all have a voice. So yes, thank you. It was a great opportunity to be here today. And Tamina, I will leave you with the final last words.
Well, before I do that, I would like for you to tell everybody about your podcast that's coming up, because I mean, people don't necessarily know you yet, but your podcast that is incredibly needed at a time when women are rising in their leadership all around the country, but all around the world. Tell the audience a little bit about your podcast.
So based on Tamina's book, I was in the book writing course too, and I said, what am I going to write my book about? But Tamina inspired me, and so I'm starting a podcast and really highlighting women in elected office, mothers in elected office, and there's some real challenges there, and the way that women are treated when they have a seat around the table. We know how important that is. So Politicking Like a Mother is going to come out on Inauguration Day, and we'll be talking to state representatives, folks who are at the local level, and hopefully some big names as well. But it's been incredible work, and as we know, again, with the work that Tamina does in her podcast and her book, it's about elevating those voices and inspiring others and understanding that we're all in this together. And so I'm excited about that. And thank you, Tamina, for everything that you've done and for this event bringing us all together today.
Yeah, well, thank you. Can't wait. And just because I'll never probably get this opportunity again because the Atlantic is between us, I want Elaine to meet my mentors here. Bonnie Sternwasser is here. Joel Paget is here. Michelle Carney is here. These are people that are on my speed dial every day. And without their encouragement, I honestly couldn't have gotten through the last 4 years. So if you can wave to each other, and maybe we'll bring Elaine over one time and have a party all over again. Last word is please continue to do the work you're doing. Please spread the word of the book. Anytime that you think I can help you, please reach out. And thank you for being here. I need to give an incredible thank you to the Bangladeshi American for Political Action Group. They are truly my family. I met them only 6 months ago, but they are so incredible. Shams Bhai, Sam Siddiqui, Kausar Jamal, if you could just wave. Nahida Ali, Radwan Chaudhary, Asan Chaudhary, Anika Rahman, Galib, Sheikh Galib, and FN 786. These are our partners today. And the support I've had from people I would never have thought about, the law firm Hammond Neal Moore, and I don't know if Michael Hammond is here. Incredible support. I am blown away. And Christine, for those 6 a.m. calls several times. Thank you for saving me and making sure I wrote this book, and to everybody. So thank you for being here. I hope 2021 actually gets better from here. I believe it will be from January 20th, but there's a lot to keep aware of between now and then. So thank you. Grateful.